This is the PR Podcast, a show about how public relations helps you tell your story to the world. We talk with great PR practitioners who have the skills, creativity, and just plain savvy to get their clients noticed. Now here's your host, Jody Fisher.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the PR Podcast. I'm Jody Fisher. Thanks for joining us. What a start we have had to this podcast. We're only on episode 8, and already we're getting some terrific reactions from all of you and terrific support as well from our community. More and more of you are downloading and listening to our podcast every week, and you're lighting up our Facebook page at the PR Podcast on Facebook with your feedback and the shares of our content. So we want to thank you for that. Just a quick reminder that we're also on Twitter and on Instagram. So just search for the PR Podcast on your social media platform of choice, and you'll find us. Please subscribe and start to share your ideas and your thoughts with us. Our YouTube channel is coming soon. We're still working on that, so stay tuned there. Let us know what you want to hear on future episodes on our social by posting on our pages or by sending us an audio file and clicking on our hosting page on anchor.com. If you find our page there, search for the PR Podcast, and you can actually click and record a message that we can perhaps share on the podcast. Maybe you can send us a question or just give us some feedback. We'd love to hear it. And as always, thanks for your support. Now, on to this week's guest. Jennifer Fermino is a veteran of the New York City media market. She's the communications director and senior advisor for the New York City Council. She's worked at a variety of PR agencies as well. And before that, she was a killer reporter at both the New York Daily News and the New York Post. She comes to New York by way of Boston, and we'll talk baseball in a minute. Jen, she's a friend and someone whose instincts for news that I admire greatly. So Jen, welcome to the PR Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you. You make me sound really impressive. That was good.
You are impressive. We only have impressive people here on the show.
That's a good answer.
Tell us a little bit about the New York City Council and what you do there.
So I am a senior advisor to the speaker, Corey Johnson, and I'm the communications director. So I do all of the social media team reports to me, the photographers report to me, we have a videographer, we have all the press team report to me. We're very busy, and I work for the body. So I work for the speaker, I work for the central staff, the individual members. They have their own sort of teams that they have their own autonomous offices. When we're passing bills, when we're weighing in on things, when the speaker's weighing in on things, this is what I do.
Political PR is, or at least can be, kind of a messy animal, right? I mean, the business of running any kind of a municipality, especially one that's as complicated and as challenging as the city of New York, can probably get pretty messy and also is kind of a 24/7 business. How do you manage interfacing and leading the communications effort, both for the council and sort of working with the individual members' teams?
That is a good question. I guess that it's, one day at a time, right? I mean, it does really help that I was a reporter, and I covered the council, I covered City Hall. So I'm familiar with the pace, but honestly, I think it's harder. It's not harder, but it's just as intense. I'll say that. It's different than being a reporter, but it really is 24/7. And at least when you worked at a newspaper, the 3:00 shift came in, somebody came in at 6. As you know, with PR, it's just us, and we're kind of like, pretty much office hours type people, but because of the 24-hour news cycle, I could be on the phone at 10:00 at night talking to a reporter. News breaks all the time, and we weigh in on a lot of things. And our social media, if there's something going on, we want to get a statement out whenever it is. And really the past few months in New York City have really been nonstop. There was COVID, and at the time, I joked that we were running a wire service, our social media, because the rules were changing so quickly, and we really wanted our social media to be like informative to people. I mean, if you remember March, like one day, all of a sudden, like, non-essential businesses were shutting down. It was just happening so quickly. So we were trying to get the information out as soon as the rules were coming down from the mayor and the governor. Um, and yeah, those were like, 24-hour sort of days of just constant. And even things like the blackout was a really big deal last summer. Was it last summer, 2019? Or was it, yeah, the blackout in 2019? That was Corey's district, the speaker. So we were getting out information, we were working, updating social media till like 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. And then, they're on in, just really on top of it. So it's something that really, particularly with social media, that we really try to do is be informative, and let people know what's going on, in real time as best
Your
as we can.
your background as a reporter and sort of the fast pace of a newsroom, and sort of the ever shifting sands under your feet when you're covering a
Yeah.
story, or maybe covering multiple stories at once, which is more likely, has got to have helped you in approaching the job that you do now, and everything you're just describing here. Where you sort of, I sometimes refer to it as juggling flaming chainsaws. I mean, is that
Yeah.
kind of part of what
Uh,
goes on in political PR?
yeah. And I have, I don't know how I could do this job if I hadn't been a reporter. And particularly, I was the City Hall bureau chief at the Daily News, so I covered City Hall. And I have a lot of respect. There's a lot of people in PR that were not reporters, and I think they're just, I don't know how they, like, people who I learn things from about, like, I tend to think like a reporter, and often that's really helpful. But I really do. And I'll tell you a funny story. There was one time where there was this reporter who was like, "Oh, I need to talk to Corey," and it was like the height of COVID, and it was really a time when, like, I mean, it was just so crazy. It was like so unprecedented. And he gave us the questions. He's like, "Here's some of my questions," and they were really like, "How do you do this? And how are you going to do, like, just all of the huge problems that we just, were just so daunting." And I'm trying to figure them out. And then somebody that I work with was like, "You don't have to like answer exactly." And I was like, "Oh my God, it never even dawned on me. Like, I can spin this." So that was like a good, and that was just recently, you know what I mean? Like, that I was just like, really, and they were like, "You don't have to get into like every detail." And I was like, "Oh my God, yes, I can spin. I'm in PR. I'm not a
And
reporter."
yeah, answering the question. I usually describe it as answering the question the way you want to answer the question, not accepting
Maybe,
not accepting the premise of the question. That's
Jody,
not to
I
say that
didn't
you
even know
dance
this was
around it, but yeah.
possible. This is like a game changer for me.
And you're still answering the question and being helpful and giving good information.
Yes,
But I think it's
totally.
it's critical, and that's when you come from the reporting world like you and I have. Um, when reporters ask a question, they want the answer to the question the way they think it. I feel like they want the answer to the question to the way they think you should answer it, and that's not necessarily what the best course of action when you're advising as a PR representative, right?
Yes, totally. And, so I have a great, I learn stuff all the time. It's good that I was a reporter. But, I enjoy this side of the business, and I feel like I'm still learning a lot.
How did you find your way from reporting to PR? I mean, I know that when I made the leap, really I was really just looking to change my lifestyle. I remember being very frustrated by living by the beeper, and I guess I'm dating
Mhm.
myself when I say
Mhm.
that, but like the
I
beeper
had a
goes
beeper
off,
when I started too.
right, and
I
you got to
remember
run
the
out the
beeper
door.
days. Yes.
And I wanted what I referred to back then as a 9 to 5 job. Well, yes, my life I guess is a little more predictable, um,
Hmm.
by and large, in PR, but there are still those nights, and what you're describing is the same thing. So how did you find your way from reporting to public relations?
So I was, very happy as a reporter, but for me, really the instability of the business, and there had just been a lot of layoffs, including people who I really respected and thought were good journalists. Um, and because of the economics, really, of the industry, it was hard. to really imagine that I could really make a lifetime, that like one day, like, the Grim Reaper wouldn't come for me. You know what I mean? Like if I see people I respected getting laid off, I just didn't like that uncertainty. I really didn't. And I would say that there are some people, I loved being a reporter. But the things I liked about it, I do feel like I can get in PR, which is I liked, the excitement of it. I'm a good writer. And I knew that there was a lot of writing in it. And I understood storytelling in a way. And I felt that like you can really do that in PR. Like if you understand, uh, storytelling, really, that's what you're doing. You're taking if it's a client or if it's the counsel, like, what a good story is. And I enjoyed that. I found that, like a really satisfactory part of being a reporter was the storytelling element. And so I really just, was kind of looking for the right, and I would have stayed in journalism if a job had come up, but it just didn't come up. And then I went and I knew Karen Hinton, who had been Mayor de Blasio's press secretary, and I had a lot of respect for her. And she left the de Blasio administration, and she had had a long career in PR, and I think she was doing a bunch of other things. And then a little while after she left, she went to work for an agency, Fenton, and Karen was at Fenton. And Fenton was like this progressive PR agency where they only took like progressive clients, and they did a lot of nonprofits and stuff with education. And Karen was there, and I talked to Karen, and it just seemed like a great opportunity. And it really was. I was only there for a year, and then I left to go to the council. And I only left because the council job was offered to me, and that was, like perfect really for my resume because I covered City Hall. But I learned a lot in that year, and anyone I actually got this advice, and I think it's really good advice. Like if you're looking to leave journalism and go into PR, an agency is a really good place to make that switch because you just learn a lot. Like, I mean, coming on to being a reporter, I didn't know how to like use Outlook barely. Like I had emails, but like, as a reporter, you're not having like meetings. Like you don't have like these 10-person meetings that are scheduled, and it's just not really like that. And I barely knew how to use Word. I remember I didn't know how to do track changes.
I still don't know how to do track change. I hate track changes. It drives me
I
crazy.
mean, it just isn't boring. I had my laptop, I had a notebook, I taped things, you know what I mean? Like I had a digital recorder. Those were the things I used, and you really kind of, work on your own. And so the agency, I just learned a lot. And also like really about PR and like what you do, when you have clients and like media plans and stuff like that, so it was a good experience. And then I went to the council, and the council is like just 24/7 nonstop. So that's like a crash course in PR.
Yeah. Do you think that those skills, I mean, it's obvious that you think those skills were transferable, but do you think reporters are doing a good job covering politics these days? And I'm not looking to knock anybody, right? But there are a lot of challenges to covering politics just in general.
Right.
And a lot of challenges. And
Yeah.
so and then you put on top of it sort of the political environment we find ourselves in these days. And I'll leave it at that.
Yes.
Do you think the reporters are doing a good job covering politics these days? And what are they doing well, or perhaps what do they need to do better?
So I think broadly, first of all, I don't envy anyone covering Trump because I just think that is like so difficult. And I have a lot of respect for a lot of those reporters, and a lot of those reporters worked with me in Room 9 when I was in, Room 9 is the press room for the City Hall press, and a lot of them are former Room 9 people and friends, and they're doing great work. So I just think it's hard. I do think social media is difficult because just in general, and I think probably any politician would say this, um, a lot of times with news stories, with political stories or stories on things that the government's doing, like they're complicated, and nuance can get lost. And context. And with social media, everything's the headline. And I mean, you know that the headline's always, if there's something wrong in a story, like 90% of the time, it's the headline. And with social media, the headline's kind of everything. So I think that's a challenge. But just broadly, I do think the press, I mean, the press that cover us, I know how difficult it is. And really, newsrooms, there's been, like I said, layoffs all the time. Newsrooms are smaller. When I started the Daily News, there was 4 people in room 9. Now there is, like for the Daily News, I really think only, although, nobody's in room 9 because of COVID. So there's really maybe 2 people that's covering like the mayor and the council. So it's like half. And, the Daily News is New York's hometown newspaper, and they're and that's a lot. A lot of the newspapers, there's people that aren't really doing serious coverage of City Hall. So it's, I appreciate everyone that is, but there's less people doing it,
Yeah,
So,
I agree with you. I think that newsrooms are under incredible stress these days.
yeah,
Just like you said, there's fewer people doing more work, and the way you described it too. I mean, we're talking about New York City. We're
yeah,
talking about the, and my personal bias aside, we're talking about the biggest and best city in America, right? At least where 90% of the action happens, political action happens. Maybe except for Washington D.C.
totally.
And to think that you've got, you can almost count on one hand the number of people who are in City Hall every day covering what's going on in the biggest city in America. That's kind of depressing. At least
I
it's depressing.
know.
It's
I
depressing
know.
to me.
And like I'm not complaining the Daily News has 2 people. I'm just but like there are, I believe, and I could be wrong, but I think I'm right. The Queen's Courthouse has no one from any daily paper. They have a press room that's completely empty. There's nobody from the Times, there's nobody from the Post, there's nobody from the Daily News. When I started as a reporter, I used to fill in for at the time there was a Queen's reporter, and everybody had, all of the papers. This wasn't that long ago. We're talking 10, 12 years ago.
Hmm.
Everybody, I don't know if the Times did, but I know Newsday had someone there, the Daily News, the Post. That was their beat. They showed up there every day. Now, if there's a big case, they'll cover the trial. But like that Queen's Court doesn't have a beat reporter, in that works in that press room. Maybe the Queen's Eagle, but I don't think and I know David Brand from the Queen's Eagle. Like, I don't think he's in that. Like, he does a good job covering Queens, but I don't think they have the manpower to have somebody solely focused on Queen's Court. So, there's a lot of holes with journalism, unfortunately, because of it's expensive to run a newspaper.
It really is, and I would love to think that there's a moment in time where that is going to turn around, because I still have reporter blood running through my veins, even though I've been a PR person for more than 20 years.
Yeah.
And I describe it that way to people that and to reporters, I say, part of my job is making your job a little easier. And by that I mean giving you the stuff you need to report the story, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not here to write your story. You're going to write your story, but I got to give you the stuff that you need, and that's part of a PR person's job. And representing my client the way they need to be represented, but really working with the reporters. And I think so many, I think we've got this popular image of PR people and reporters always being at odds with each other. And for me, that is not the case. I don't know about your experience.
Yeah, no, totally. And, it's actually one of the reasons that I felt that I could do PR was because I'd worked with good PR people, and I knew that there was a sort of part of the job where you worked with reporters. I mean, incredible help from people of just because, these issues are complicated, like I said, and it's rewarding to explain something like what I do right now with the council, like explain something with city government. Like, I'll tell you today, someone asked us like a question about like, if you run for the city council, like, are there anything that like exclude you? Like, are there any convictions that would exclude you? And we've had a back and forth with the lawyer and how the law, and like where, one of the people on our press team, they're going to explain to the lawyer, like, it's not a clear cut thing, but there are some offenses, like, and that's not even that complicated, but like we did the research, we help them. And then it's probably like a small piece of a story, but it will be, it's an important thing to get right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've got to imagine going back to what you were saying about, social media and kind of the tweet being the headline, so to speak.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
social media has got to be both a blessing and a curse from the perspective of the way and the how you do your job. I mean, on the one hand, social media can be terrifically beneficial in getting a clear message out in the voice and the verbiage of the council or Speaker Johnson or whoever. At the same
Yes.
time, you can have a tweet come in at deadline for a newsroom and completely upend the story, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's really, and in terms of like, it helps us kind of know what the reporters are thinking so we can sort of, it helps with prep, you know what I mean? Because like we can see like, okay, so so and so has been, we have like the same reporters that really cover us. So we'll know that someone's been tweeting about something and I'll have a good sense, because Corey does, several off topic press conferences a month where it's just like a free for all. Anybody can ask anything. So, we know what the reporters are thinking about, and we can watch social media, their social media, and we can certainly very quickly respond to things. And so that's a help. But, it can be difficult because, like I said, what the council's position is or what we're doing is complicated. And sometimes when people try to say things on social, especially Twitter, because that's really where most of politics is, um, they can get it wrong or miss something. And so then you're like, you know, I don't know, I don't know, like what, if you get something wrong, it's very hard. It's easier to get the correction in a newspaper than to get a reporter to correct a tweet. I will say that.
Wow, really? That's
Yeah,
interesting.
because I think social media is so new that there really, there are rules to journalism that are pretty much followed, and also they're calling for comment before they do a story. So sometimes things go on social that nobody's called me, and it's not right, and I can, yeah, social media gives me, we have a love. I won't say hate, but we have our ups and our downs with social media.
That is so interesting. Because I know that in my career, getting reporters or editors to correct factual inaccuracies in a story is probably the hardest thing you can do as a reporter. One, it's just asking for the correction. You need to make sure that you're asking for a factual correction. You're like,
Yes.
you said it's
Yeah.
blue and it's actually red, kind of thing.
Yes. And you know that most things don't really fall into that. What I
Right, right.
like, it's not so easy. It's more just like, yes, that's true, but you're missing this whole other part of it, and therefore this looks really different. And those are, yeah, those are
It's
the,
tough, right? And so is social, can social help you in those situations, or does social actually
well,
hurt?
it's funny because it's a real debate of like, do you give it oxygen? You know what I mean? By like going on
Yeah.
social, uh, especially because, you know, the world of City Hall is kind of like a big high school, right? Like everybody's, so there's things that maybe people would miss, but we have a great social media manager, Sarah Rodriguez, who's fantastic. And she has sort of convinced me to the belief, because I think I was initially of the don't give it oxygen, but Sarah is very smart. And she says, if you leave these things out there, particularly if it's like a tweet, like if somebody tweets something that's wrong or you don't respond to things on social, she's like, uh, she's like, people my age, she's a little younger who doesn't gets a lot of her news from social media and isn't really as much of a newspaper reader. She's like, if I don't see somebody respond, I think it's true. So I have a different perspective on that now, thanks to Sarah.
That's really interesting, and that brings up a really interesting, I think, point of conversation. And I have this conversation with my kids. I'm sort of teaching them checking your sources and
Mhm.
making sure you're getting your information from verifiable sources. I think we're in an environment right now where everyone has access to these megaphones, whether it's social media or what have you, and they can put anything out there they want. And people who don't understand how to consume information properly from verifiable sources like news organizations or the person who's actually saying it, although you could debunk that with our president because he just kind of just
Mhm.
says whatever he feels like saying. I digress. The importance of making sure the information that you're getting is from a verifiable source. How do you deal with that in your job and your day to day?
Well, I think we're lucky. I think we really do have a lot of good reporters that are covering us, and there aren't very many. Uh, I don't have that many issues with like them getting it from like bad sources. I really don't. I mean, there are times when maybe I I don't agree with what other people are saying or how other people are spinning it, but the facts, I don't really fight over the facts that much with them. So I'm very lucky in that. That's not occasionally what happens though is, some of these like smaller outlets will like they didn't go to the press conference. They don't really understand how like the legislative process. So like occasionally we'll have something like somebody like we introduce a bill and these smaller outlets that don't cover so much like they'll take it one step further and they'll be like, okay, the city council today passed a bill and it's now you that's now the law, and that's not how it works. So that's mostly the type of stuff, but people are pretty understanding because like I'm not, the advantage I have is that when I call, I am calling from the council. You know what I mean? Like I'm not. I think there is an advantage to that than being working in an agency or having a client. Like I come, I'm calling from the New York City Council, and I'll go on the record and be like, "This isn't true. You have to fix this. Like this is not how we introduced that bill today. We didn't pass legislation on it, and so that's not. We're lucky with that."
Right. And that's kind of where I'm going, though. You have what I referenced, these everybody has access to the same megaphone. And some people may get something that's a little more complicated, like legislation. They might get it wrong. They might get a detail of it
Yeah.
wrong. Something as simple as your example, introducing legislation versus actually passing a bill. Um, but out there in the social media sphere, it all initially looks like it holds the same weight, right? And so
Yes.
making
And
sure that you're looking at the source and going, well, hold on, am I reading, the Daily News, the New York Times, or am I reading Joe's
exactly.
blog?
And it's unfortunate because uh, there are things that look real, and I just know that they're not from being a reporter. And it's really sad, like how much misinformation. My mother will post things on Facebook, and I call her, and I'm like, "Ma, like, do you even think that that's true?
Right.
Like, like on
Like,
what planet? Like, who? Like, look at this. Like,
right.
I'm just
Gut check that for a minute. Right.
I was like, come on, like, my any like alarmist thing, my mother is like, worried about if there's like a thing, and I'm like, you know, but it is hard for people.
Yeah. Yeah. It really is. Going back to, you mentioned real quick press conferences,
Mhm.
and sort of using those, and depending on the press conference, they can be the most boring thing in the world that no one wants to cover, or they
Mhm.
can be like you reference it, like this amazing free for all, that has just got all the theatrics of daytime TV. How do you prepare the speaker or anyone else to step in front of that podium and a phalanx of cameras and reporters with notebooks, knowing that those reporters could ask just about
Yeah.
anything they might feel like asking?
So it is so stressful for me, just personally. I am very lucky in that Corey is very good, and he has great media instincts, and we really try to follow everything. Like in the mornings when I'm reading the papers, I'm constantly like emailing myself. I start out the morning, I read. I start out with either the Post or the Daily News, like one of those two, depending on which cover. Who's ever like front page grabs me more. Um, and then like I'll go to the Times and the Journal, but I'm constantly like just making notes to myself of like, this might come up, this might come up. And we're really just like constantly prepping. We have these things, we don't really have a choice in the matter. So we have the council, the city charter like mandates that the council meets twice a month. Most months, I think in the summer it goes down to once. And I think maybe August we don't meet at all, or we meet once. I can't remember. I should know since August was just 2 months ago. But in the summer it's like a little bit slower. But it's basically twice a month we meet and we have to pass bills and we have this press conference beforehand. But yeah, it's really difficult. It's just a question. And no matter how much we prepare, I do feel like there's just something that will be you just didn't see coming. And luckily but really our like sort of guiding principle always is to just be as honest and factual as possible, including like if Corey doesn't know the answer, which is very rare because he's really on the ball, and he actually has like a photographic memory, believe it or not. And it's funny because when I first started working for Corey, but before I even like started, New York Magazine called me and they were like, "Oh, we want to do a profile." I mean, like I hadn't started yet, so I wasn't gonna be like, actually, like I don't start for another like 10 days, because it was like right after it was announced I was doing it. So I was like kind of working with New York Magazine, and so then I had to call Corey, and he's like, talk to my mother. She can, this was like a profile. So I call his mother, and she says, and I said, "Oh, hey, I'm Jan. I'm like the new comms director. And do you want to talk to New York Magazine?" So I had to like prep his mother. Meanwhile, I wasn't even like working for Corey. Like I knew him, but like, so I'm like prepping his mother, and she says, well, I said, "What would you say about Corey?" She said, "Oh, he's so smart." She's from Boston like me. And she has the strongest Boston accent. She's like, "He's so smart. He has like a photographic memory." So she said that. And in my mind, I'm like, "Oh yeah, my mother thinks I'm a genius too." You know what I mean? Now that I work with Corey, he really does have like a photographic memory. So that makes it helpful. But, even him, sometimes he's not going to know the answer, and he'll just go, "I'm not really familiar with that. I'll have my press office reach out." That's all you can do. I mean, I think the best thing about the fact that I work for newspapers, I bring like a calm to it. Like you're never going to get in trouble for just like admitting the truth. Really, what always screws you up for politicians is trying to cover up for things or seem like something you did. Like, just say it. If you screw it up, if you change your mind, you just got to come out and say it.
That's terrific. That's terrific. And that is refreshing too, because I agree with you. You never get in trouble for telling the truth, even if the truth isn't that great.
Yeah.
It's just,
it's so much easier. You save yourself and I'm like, Corey intuitively knows this. You save yourself just so much agita going forward than trying to twist through knots and come up with a cute answer that doesn't really work. That'll like unravel, that takes you like, 7 minutes to explain. So yeah.
That is so great.
Press conferences are like, I hate those days. I get very nervous.
Well, Jen, you and I could talk forever on this, right? But I know you're very busy. We got to let you get back to work. This has been a great conversation. Please let people know how they can find you online.
So I think the one that I'm on the most is probably Twitter, even though I don't post that much, but I'm like constantly on it. I'm at J Fermino, just at J Fermino. That's my Twitter handle. I'm on LinkedIn. I have to like update my LinkedIn profile, but I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm on Facebook, but really that's just so that I can like see pictures of my nieces and nephews. So,
that's great. So then Twitter is where we shall find you. Well, Thank you again for spending time with us, sharing some of your knowledge. We really appreciate it. And it was great to talk with you again after a bunch of years.
Yeah, it's great to talk to you.
Wonderful. And thanks everyone for listening. Please remember to subscribe to the show, like us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, all at the PR Podcast, and send us a question or a comment that we can address on a future episode. And we'll see you next time on the PR Podcast.